I was really impressed by some of his work where he makes a very striking decision to make a distinction between automaton and robot, seeing them as really very separate categories of machines, if you like. So I wanted to ask if you would talk a little bit about automaton versus robot.
Let me give you a very brief survey of my ideas in this respect. I think man at first started trying to extend their bodies by making tools. The first one, I think one of the first tools we made was just a stick. You get a longer arm, so we could hit something that was further than we could reach. That's the first step, making a tool. Then you make the tool more complicated. For instance, you want to go faster, and we invented the wheel. Eventually, from the wheel, from these things, we made more complex things with more moving parts, etc., until we invented, to make it very fast, etc., things like clocks, like cars, charts, motors, etc. So more and more and more, we made these things. At the same time, all this evolution of technology was compromised by a strong oppression of a belief system that has oppressed always all attempts of humans to create, because in the Judaic, Christian, and certainly in the Islamic tradition, this is a complete taboo. We should not create. It's a privilege of God. Nevertheless, fortunately, we have done it. And we have made a great progress by doing that. But then comes the thing. So we first make tools as extensions of our bodies. Then we made machines, which are actually more complicated tools with more functions and so in a certain way programmable. And then from machines to automatons. Those are machines that operate without human intervention. You can switch them on and they do their thing, pluck, pluck, pluck. Eventually you can reprogram them and they do something else, pluck, 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 without human intervention. And then we come in the gradual stage of where the robot enters into the picture. Now for me, and this may be a particular definition that I apply, the distinction between a machine and a robot is that a robot has to have capabilities of adapting to the environment. That's why I call a player piano as such not a robot. It's a machine. You can program it like many machines, etc., but it's as such not a robot. It only becomes a robot if you give it interaction with the world, with the environment in which it operates. So if it has minimal senses of perception, if it can perceive things and adapt accordingly, that's the point where the robot starts. But that's a definitory question. You do not have to agree, but I think that's a clear line. Although it's gradual, of course it's gradual. And robotics go further and further, and then there's this vision of robots taking autonomy, etc. But I don't have the slightest fear as that. First of all, it's science fiction, and then again, I think it's this religious fear that comes back from, you will be punished if you make a machine because it will kill you, like the golem idea, you know, the Jewish golem idea. It's typical of Jewish thinking. It's the hubris of man making something that will destroy you yourself. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have created something. I think we have to forget all that. And by the way, if I may tell you something, how close this idea of the taboo on creation is in our culture. Because if you compare to Asiatic cultures, and I happen to know pretty well actually, the Japanese culture, I studied some Japanese, etc. And you see what the reaction is of Japanese people to robots. For Japanese people, robots, there is no fear there. It's a thing of humor. It's pleasure. It's pure pleasure. There is no country in the world where robots are so popular than in Japan. And it's not loaded with all these Asimov things and all, all these fear things. It's just a joy. And we'll just try to be brief. So, more questions?
Yes, okay.
me, I'm kind of concerned not as just like, I'm concerned about technology in general and how it like influences us as people. So you brought up the Japanese and also Americans as self-defense. An increasingly large like suicide rate, and what that has maybe to do with like the technology, not as just as tools, but as something that disrupts our understanding of reality. That maybe before these tools became so advanced, that we were able to perceive things in a different way that was more attainable. And now at this point, it's harder for us to deal with it on a daily basis. You know, maybe I'm not really coherent enough.
Well, I don't see an immediate relation between suicide rates and the advancement of technology. But what I can tell you, knowing Japanese culture a bit, is that suicide is, in my opinion, absolutely, in Japan, unrelated to technology because it's part of their culture. We have a culture that has tabooed suicide. It's in the Bible. You cannot do that. Life is given to you by God, and you don't have the right to take it. The Japanese don't have that. It's a question of honor. If you are dishonored, etc., you commit suicide. And that has nothing to do with technology, nothing whatsoever. So I don't see the relation there. I don't see how technology would have influenced that. It's a cultural value. It's a completely different culture.
One thing, though, that could be interesting to consider as well is there have been really important studies done about how the internet in particular as a kind of technology has helped many people who would have committed suicide or were on the verge of committing suicide, but discovered a community of like-minded people even though they were very isolated. So it's actually been discovered that in many cases it also helps people who would have been in a position to maybe consider taking their own lives and instead find that they aren't as alone as they thought. So I think however you look at it, there can be another perspective. There's a lot of research that's been done on that, in particular out of Oxford's Internet Center, for example, on young people in isolated rural areas with access to the internet who have been greatly helped because they might find themselves in a very isolating position but have discovered an online community. So just to see it from a slightly different angle.
Yes?
How much of the music we've been listening to tonight was pre-programmed and how much of it was determined by the machines in relationship to the art?
I must say, I think most of the music that you heard, at least for the part that I have any relation with, is pre-programmed, is sequenced in a way. It's in that way, it's not really robotic in the large sense as I depicted in my definition. However, the machines themselves are robots. Because, first of all, they know their environment, they know their volume, they are filled with feedback mechanisms to control themselves. So, in a way. But of course, you can go further, and I must say in my own work and the work we do at the Logos Foundation, I concentrate very much on highly interactive applications. For instance, I have this system for gesture control where they can play on interactive with human gesture, with Doppler systems that I have and radar systems to detect human gesture. You can also play with them visually. For instance, the cello piece, it is imaginable to do that live, where the drums would play depending on what the cello plays. The only thing is that if you want to do such applications, you need a lot more time. It's much easier to write it out linear and then to play along than to write an algorithmic program where you have to really program low-level code you have to write them, because you have to say to the robot, okay, when the cello makes a tweaky sound on that string, then do that, under this condition, and if this is followed by that, then do that, etc., etc. Becomes an algorithmic, an intelligent program, as we say. So. But it's a matter of time. But it can be done with these machines, for sure.
Can I just ask Gottfried one question? About Pythagoras. For people who were here last night and heard Martin's talk about Pythagoras, and also tonight we heard a piece that was that used Pythagorean tuning. I wondered if you could just say a few things about your take on Pythagoras and this idea of sort of a mathematics of music, or a kind of idealized conception of what a musical sound or tonal sound is.
Well, Pythagoras and Plato and all these theories and Euclid, etc., all are pre-Christian. And what they tried to do was figuring out an ideal that's hidden behind reality. And they imposed these ideas on that reality. But they didn't have the tools at that time to check it. And probably the majority of you have learned, if you had any music lessons, for instance, that the harmonic series is a harmonic series. I'm sure you have all been told that an octave is twice the fundamental frequency, and the next overtone is the fifth, so 3 times the fundamental frequency, and 4 times, and 5 times, etc. It's a beautiful system. It does not fit with our tonal system, because we have a temperate system, which is completely irrational. It's a 12 square of 2 based. So this is irrational because it didn't fit. Pythagoras was very concerned about that. One of his big problems was the square root of 2, because that's an irrational number. How can with just one side can you have a square with that leads to an irrational number? It was just unacceptable. But his whole music, when it started working on overtones, on strings, etc., he could figure it out, and he saw the beauty of that system. Now I can tell you, I've been teaching acoustics for many years and did a lot of experimental results. But not one single object in nature has a harmonic series in that sense. There is no octave, no double frequency in any spectrum that's precise. It's always a bit off. And the further you go in the series, the more it is off. Fortunately, because if it were not off, music would be awfully boring as 1950s electronic music, where they tried to make with analog synthesizers, additive synthesis with sine waves, etc. Now that sounds very funny, and I'm not putting it down because it was a very interesting period. But let's be serious. Honestly speaking, if you listen to the sounds of additive synthesis made with pure sine wave oscillators, this is terribly boring, because you hear a sound and nothing happens. It's steady state. It has no friction. There is nothing going. There is no phasing, no nothing. A natural, if you take a piano string, you can do the experiment for yourself. Play a low note, have your fingers on halfway the string, listen to the pitch you get. You will hear that it's not an octave. Play the note an octave higher and you hear that it's dissonant. It just doesn't fit. They told you at school all religious topics. Because 2, 3, 4, 5, it's as if God created the world. And that's the idea. I've said it already a couple of times. You have no idea how far religion has penetrated our science, our culture, etc. They make us believe there is something behind it that's not there. You can't prove it. It's just not there. It's even not interesting if it were there.
Do we have more time, or does anyone want to continue talking? Or should we wrap up? Are we done? Okay, well, thank you very much for the fantastic evening, everybody, and I hope to see people here tomorrow night. Thanks. Thanks, Godfried.